Next fly we're going to tie today is a Clouser Minnow, and similar to the other flies in the series, we want to pinch down the barb of the hook before we tie the fly. Again, it just makes it safer for us and faster to remove in the event that we hook ourselves instead of the fish. And so once we've pinched the barb down, I've mounted the hook in the vise where the shank of the hook is roughly parallel to the table. And we're going to add our thread by spiral wrapping forward and then coming back over the top in the opposite direction to create a jam knot. And so the tension of the thread actually holds that in place. We can then take the excess material, this tag end of the thread, and cut that off. And then we're going to lay down a thread base for the fly. And I like working with about an inch of thread out of the tip of the bobbin, because that way I can put the thread on in wraps just by rotating my wrist. And it allows us to put that thread base down fairly quickly. And in this particular fly, I'm going to make several passes because I want to cover the hook shank with the white thread. And that way it will kind of disappear into the body of the fly. And so it doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, it does help camouflage the fact that there is a hook inside the body of this fly. And so that's a reasonably decent thread base. And then I'm coming back to a spot that is maybe a third of the way from behind the eye of the hook to the back of the fly. And at that point we're going to take one of these dumbbell shaped eyes, and we're going to set that on top of the hook shank, and we're going to make 3 wraps this way and then a locking wrap that way, and then we're going to go around the hook the other way. And I'm going to rotate the fly to give you a little different angle and show you this, because I want to essentially center the dumbbell. And then what we're doing is 3 wraps across this way, a locking wrap, and then we're coming back with 3 wraps the other way and a locking wrap on this side. And we're just building those up, which locks that dumbbell eye in place. Now I'm going to rotate this back and wiggle it a little bit. Okay, so it's fairly tight, but I want to put a few more wraps on just to really lock it in place. And you'll notice that that time, instead of the 3, I did 5, but I did 5 both ways, so it's still symmetrical. And that hook, the eyes of that are now fairly well locked in place. If you're worried about it at this stage, you could actually put a drop of super glue on the thread on either side and allow that to dry. And then you could tie a knot, set it aside, let everything dry, and then come back. I don't believe that that's necessary. And so I'm going to then put wrap a thread up that way, and now I'm going to come and put a couple of wraps over the hook shank but underneath the eyes. That just really locks it down a little bit more. And then I'm going to come back up here to the front, and we're going to take a little bit of bucktail. And so I want the white bucktail that we're going to start out tying that on the top of the hook, but because of the way that we mounted the dumbbell eyes, eventually when we're done with the fly, the weight is going to cause this to turn upside down. And so in working with the bucktail, what we want to do is even up the tips of the fibers. And it doesn't have to be perfect like we would with stacking, but just get them to where you know, we get rid of all the ones that are particularly different length, and then stroke the bottoms and stuff to pull out any of the hairs that are a little bit short, since those won't get tied in. So that's a nice sized clump of bucktail, and we're going to measure this against the fly. So see, that would give us something that sticks back about twice the size of the overall fly. And so I'm going to transfer this to my other hand, and then I'm going to come up here at the front of the fly, and I'm going to make a few loose wraps and then position this so that that's held in place. And now I'm going to wrap a few times there, and then I'm going to sneak over behind the eye and put some more wraps there, and then we'll spiral wrap down the hook shank a little distance, and then turn around and come back the opposite direction. Then we'll come under the eye and come back to the front, and I've basically pulled this back. We're putting a few wraps of thread underneath the bucktail, and then we'll trim these pieces of bucktail at a careful angle. And what that did is you'll notice if I turn this a bit that they're flared, but it's tapering from here down towards the eye. And then I'm going to come back and put thread wraps over those, and I'm starting out with loose wraps because we're just trying to trap everything and pull it together into a nice taper. There we go. Now we're coming in back over the top of that with tighter wraps, and that gets to where we have the first layer done, and I'm going to put one of the double hitches in just to lock everything together. And that double hitch is length of thread. I put my finger on here, I make 1.5 wraps, and I'll take the top half over the eye of the hook and leave the bottom half there. And now I've got 2 snug wraps that will hold all of that in place. Now if you have a vise that's capable of rotating, then you can go ahead and just rotate the vise to get to the other side. Since a lot of people don't have that option, we've got the knots in place that lets us take this out of the vise, turn the fly over, and now we've got things positioned to add a little bit more material to the top of the fly. And so I'm going to take a small amount of the white bucktail, we'll cut that off, and we're going to basically treat this very similarly to what we did before. And we're going to make an underwing of white, and that should be about the same length as what the other is. And I'm just going to push that down. Now we're going to put a few wraps of thread right here to basically balance out the top and the bottom of the fly. Now I'm going to trim that excess material, and there's still an extra couple of hairs in there that we want to get rid of. There we go. Now we'll put a few wraps over that to make another tapered base. And now what I like to do is go ahead and take a few strands of crystal flash, and I kind of like to use about 5 strands. And so you see this is going to add a little bit of sparkle and shine, and since they're not quite even, I'm going to even up the tips pretty close. Then I'm just going to take my scissors and cut those to even it up. Then I'm going to check, and if I make this doubled over so that we've got half on either side, then that looks like we've got plenty of length. And so I'll tie this in at the midpoint with a couple of wraps, and then I'll pull this back, and we're going to bury that flash in the middle of the fly. And for the moment, I'm going to trim this about the same length as what the opposite side was. When we get done with the fly, if we need to, then we can shorten those a little bit more. And now we're going to take the overwing, and for the overwing I want the bright chartreuse. And this is something that for fishing for smallmouth bass, the chartreuse over white is absolutely one of my favorite Clouser Minnow colors. And you can choose how much of the color you want to add to the fly. Again, we're just trying to stack the hairs so everything is close to the same length. And if you can do it without dropping a few of the hairs, that's even better. Now this one, you see we've got, in a few cases, there's some underfur, and so we have to make sure we get that underfur out. And we do that just by essentially combing the hair with our fingers. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but the more of those we get out, the better the end results will be. And so with this, I want to add probably about that much length, and we'll set that down on top of the fly right there, and add some thread wraps. And we're going to work our way forward a little bit, and then we'll pull this back up, and I'm coming out to the tip. And now what I want to do is bring the scissors in here again, creating that taper so that we don't have an abrupt step change in the size. And sorry for having my hand in the way there. Then I'm just basically pulling this up and over it, and we've got an extra hair there that we'll pull out of the way. And what we're going to do now is build up the head of the fly with a little bit of this white thread. And I want to come back a little bit closer to the eyes and with some tighter wraps there. And then if we take this, we do that double hitch again and put 2 or 3 of those on the fly. And I'm going to put a third one just because I don't like the way that last one's seated. And that will lock that down. And at this point, you can take and cut the thread. If a person wants, they could take a little bit of head cement and coat that, or other people actually prefer using Sally Hansen Hard as Nails fingernail polish. And the fingernail polish will actually come in there and smooth out the thread wraps and give you something that almost paints that and gives it a smooth base. And so the last steps that we have is to come back here, and we've got the length of the sparkle is about the same length as the white. I'm looking at it and trying to decide, you know, this is actually good. We could, if aesthetically we wanted to add a little bit more chartreuse, then we could take a bigger clump and add that on. But this is still an effective fly. And what I think I want to do is shorten the crystal flash just a little bit more. And so I'm going to do that. Take the scissors right in here where there's not any hair. Trim that off. And then that way the crystal flash, except for these 2 or 3, is about the same length as the chartreuse in there. There you go. And that is the finished Clouser Minnow.